breaking news to Steve right now. We ready to go? Yeah? Okay. I do want to welcome everyone to this edition of Dawn at Oaklawn. Very honored and privileged to have Hall of Fame trainer Steve Asmussen joining us this morning. Steve was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2016, and for those of you that didn't know, he does have two sons. Well, he has three sons, two that are currently riding at the meet, and Steve himself was once a jockey. I love that you giggle whenever I say that, because is it kind of cool that your sons had more success as riders than you did?
It really is. You said that I was a jockey, and it is worth giggling about and stuff. But you think back to it and stuff, just an awesome experience, and for it to end up here is what a blessing.
Very full circle.
Very much so. It's been a tremendous time, especially tremendous year, and in horse racing to be able to do it with my family.
Yeah.
Obviously started with my parents, and then for the kids to have the success that they're having, and it's keeps coming.
Now, I believe your parents, and I adore your parents. I mean, especially his mom, who is a major fashionista. 65 years, I believe they've been married.
Yesterday was their 64th wedding anniversary, which of all their accomplishments, that's the one they should be the proudest of.
Absolutely. Steve has saddled more than 54,000 starters in the afternoons, 10,858 wins, because I had to change that because you've had one yesterday. 990 of those have been at Oaklawn. So you're just 10 away from another milestone. Going through some photo archives, a lot of milestones have occurred for you here at Oaklawn.
Oh, absolutely. Oaklawn's been great to us. 10,000th win was here with Betty's Ready. Obviously that was unbelievably significant, but with racing is just try to add to it, and we expect to have a big day today, and it's what I love about horse racing. Your past performances won't win today, you got to show up and do it.
Those more than 10,000 wins on the cusp of 11 has produced earnings of more than $469 million. That's a lot of coin that your horses have produced.
Yeah, it's the opportunities that we're given and the quality of horses that we continue to get. It is expected and needs to be added to continue doing it. But to grow up in a racing family, obviously New Mexico in the summers, South Texas in the winters, to watching the races that we're able to compete in now on TV, to the stage that we're on now. We got the two horses going into the Derby 14 days out, and how exciting that is. And, it's just amazing how things have worked out. And we've done it collectively, and, plan on it to continue.
That just hit me that we're only 14 days away from the next Kentucky Derby. It seems for some reason like it's further, but it's really just around the corner. Steve is the most successful trainer as he wins at a 20% clip. His runners are in the money 50%. That's part of the reason why I pick you so often, because you're so darn consistent. He has 8 Breeders' Cup wins, including 2 Classic wins, 2007 with Curlin and 2017 with Gunrunner. 2 Preaknesses and a Belmont. And talking about the Kentucky Derby, he has had to settle for runner-up 3 times. Why is that darn Derby so elusive?
I think everybody, needs a goal and something to chase, and it'll happen when it's meant to be. But it's to think that we didn't win the Derby with horses like Curlin and Gunrunner, in the Epicenter's Derby a couple of years ago when he looked home free and stuff. It's the Derby is the one race that feels like it's more of an event than a race, and like the results are predetermined. They just let you live through it to see how you'll react. It's obviously
I love that.
something that has eluded me, but we definitely don't plan on giving up anytime soon.
Well, he's certainly not giving up in 14 days. He has two Kentucky Derby hopefuls. Tastic, who has 3 wins from 8 starts, has already earned $1.5 million. He was 3rd in the Southwest, 5th in the Rebel, and then triumphed in the Louisiana Derby under the lights, and a nice little price as well. Were you surprised by his performance?
I think the one thing that surprised us with Tastic, we were disappointed with his Rebel run here. But it may be as simple as the difference in him at 1 1/16 to the 1 3/16 of the Louisiana Derby. If watching the race of the Louisiana Derby, if it was 1 1/16, he'd have been 4th or 5th.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I'm definitely counting on with Tastic is how much he truly will benefit from it being 1.25 miles. And how late, he is, if anything, he accelerates late.
Also, in addition to Tastic, he has Publisher, who, that would be pretty cool if he breaks his maiden in the Kentucky Derby. He was runner-up in the Arkansas Derby after a 4th in the Rebel. Typically, you don't run maidens in big races like that. What was the decision, and what talent did he show you that led to that?
Well, the company's kept in the morning. We talked with the opportunities we're given in the company that they have in the morning. Publisher's a horse that trained regularly, whether it be Tastic or Magnitude or horses that were competing successfully at that level against that group. So that gave us plenty of confidence that he's as good or up to the task. I laughed about it this morning. The Publisher and Tastic worked 5/8 today at Churchill, 59-3,
Wow.
Huge work. Obviously wanted something. It's been a while since both of them run. But saying that, at 5/8, Publisher looks quicker than Tastic in the workout this morning. But whenever he's trained with horses, you mentioned Tastic's 3 wins and $1 million and $1.6 million. He's one of the more successful horses going into it. And when you watch Publisher and Tastic work, you'll know why you run Publisher in the big races.
Interesting. How do you think Publisher is going to handle that 1.25 miles?
I think that he'll handle it well. I need him to be a little bit more assertive with himself earlier in a race. I think Publisher's got he's got a beautiful demeanor, as in no situation excites him. He's as laid back as any horse that you've ever trained.
Which is a huge advantage that Saturday.
It is, as in he won't waste any of it, but you
Got you.
also want him up in the race a little more.
Okay.
You just, his laid back at it, now would be a good time.
Oh, okay.
Now
okay.
would be a good time. So I think that the excitement of the Derby itself, the walkover that nothing else matches,
Yeah.
His demeanor, it'll bring out the best in him, that sort of excitement.
That's a huge week just leading up, because the backside of Churchill, I resemble it to Times Square, because there are so many people everywhere, somewhere they probably shouldn't be. But it's just the buildup of the whole week. Is that week stressful for you, or is it the actual day when it comes down to it? Because you've got microphones in your face all the time.
I guess being 0 for 26 in the race, I guess it works for me like it does Publisher. What are you worried about? We've been through it like in that situation. I just when you participated in the Derby and you've watched
That
the Derby
many times.
and know, to compete at this level, the amount of respect that I have for all the participants is, I started out by saying how much respect for them I have it, but I think when Rich Strike runs down Epicenter, and Wayne Lucas scratched the day before, the circumstances in which
the
you can
racing
win or
gods.
lose
the
goodness. Derby are. If you told somebody, they would nah, that didn't happen.
You couldn't even write that.
It's just like we were in the holding barn for the Travers, and Eric Reed was standing there and watching Epicenter went around. He walked up to me and said, "I have no idea how we beat him," and I'm like, "Me neither." It's just the event of the Derby is what it is. You talk about it being Times Square. And I think that that's a great analogy. And I think it'd be Times Square on New Year's Eve. You're glad you're there. You know, I love the fact that there's that many people that are that excited about horse racing and the Derby itself and the Derby on that level. And I couldn't appreciate it anymore. It is so funny for me to this point, the excitement of how you feel leading up to it, walking over.
Yes.
And you're just walking on a cloud, walking over to the paddock, and then you get your hiney kicked and the walk back feels like about 10 miles.
I bet it does. Does it matter to you for post position for the Derby, or is that an important key?
Unbelievably important, but you won't know how important it is until after the race runs. I think one of our, I can't believe Curlin got beat. He got shuffled back. It, put him in a position that was impossible for him to win from. And on that day, Street Sense win it, and Francis Gender, and it just like you weren't the story. That was a better story than you were, and the circumstances of that. And then we had, looking at Lee from the one hole, who, they clear out the path. He gets a dream trip under Lannery, runs a great second, the best race he ever ran in his life from the one hole. And then another one of our seconds was Nero from the 20 hole. So do you want the one hole or do you want the 20? Absolutely not. Yet two of our better finishes were from the one hole and from the 20. So I tell everybody on post positions, you never know to complain about them until after the race runs.
Very true. Today's a big day, in fact, for Steve. Multiple runners well represented in the Valley of the Vapors with Miss Martini. What just a wonderful little filly she's turned out to be.
She is. When you say little filly, she is a filly that, very fortunate that Jackpot Farm, Terry Green purchased. She actually was post-sale in the Derby in the Keeneland September. Just a beautiful filly, not real big in stature, but being by Curlin, how I feel about him, the offspring is done. You expect them to get better with time, per usual, but for her to come out, 2 for 4 with 2 seconds, nice little stakes win. Today's her first try at 2 turns, nice competitive field, but we're very fortunate to have her.
Well, the pedigree certainly supports the stretch out. What was the decision to, obviously, let's give her the opportunity, but to not keep her sprinting?
Well, I think it's time.
Okay.
I didn't want to get ahead of her because of her stature. I think that this filly, will continue to physically develop, and it is nice for her to pay for things and be rewarded. And her winning, being a stakes winner now with her pedigree, she has secured value. So now's the time.
I love that. Oaklawn Handicap, he is well represented as well with Disarm, who was actually 4th in the 2023 running of the Kentucky Derby and won an allowance off a 6-month layoff. And one of my faves, Red Route 1, who never gets the first call, but he always comes running late. I absolutely love true closers like that. What are your thoughts on the handicap today?
Well, 2 unbelievable homebreds for Winchell. Disarm, like you mentioned, 4th in the Derby 2 years ago, 2nd in the Travers, horse that's capable. Had a very moderate year last year. Not bad by any standards, but expected better from him. And it was great to see him start off this year with a number that was equal to how he finished off last year. He's got several works since. Love how he's worked over the track, and it's time for him to jump forward. I think that last year's form on him isn't good enough to win today's race, but we are expecting him to move forward today.
Okay, and Red Route 1, it looks like there could be enough speed in that field to really set up a nice run for him.
You mentioned Red Route 1, he just, whenever they're not paying attention to him, he walks in the winner's circle. He's that caliber of horse. Did the same thing last year in the New Orleans Classic. Got the pace scenario that he needed again in the Essex. Horse that's extremely accomplished. I think 5-time stakes winner, over $2 million, and 15 to 1 on the morning line. And he's done things that several of them in there haven't and never will.
I love that. How many horses currently on your roster?
We have over 300 head in training right now, moving several 2-year-olds into the barn this time of year, so you do accumulate quite a few horses. Love having several horses here to run in all categories here at Oaklawn, and then once Oaklawn's over, that the number of the older horses dwindles a bit, and then you make room for the 2-year-olds to start it all over again.
So in addition to being leading trainer, Steve is also leading owner. He owns quite a few. I believe it was 1 or 2 years ago, you had 83 of your own.
Probably keeping during the Oaklawn meet, I probably, Oaklawn Lone Star, we all, Holmes, Arlington, Texas, all 3 of the boys were born there, love to support it. So we 50 to 70 between them. We'll cut way back, about the middle of summer and stuff like that. And then in the fall, we'll gather them back up to start the Oaklawn Lone Star run again.
I loved your answer a few years ago. You claimed, I think, an Archie bred maiden. And I said, why in the world would you claim an Archie bred maiden given the amount of just true talent you have in your barn? Do you remember what your answer was?
Because they run the race.
They ride a race for it. So if they ride a race for it, you can darn well be certain that Steve Asmussen is going to have a horse for it. Is there a horse that you've had during your tenure that maybe didn't get the spotlight that you thought he or she deserved?
Bill Parcells said it best. You are what your record says you are. I think that those horses, the if, woulda, shoulda, couldas, that doesn't matter. I think what truly defines great horses and why it is not fair to compare horses that weren't allowed to run against each other is how they show up and what they look like when it actually matters. And I think that's what truly separates the great racehorses. We've had, I cannot say, it is impossible to be around horses like Curlin, Rachel, Gunrunner, Midnight Pursuit that are so special and unique. And I spend a lot of time driving up and down the road. It's my preferred way to travel because of, you get in your own head. And I've thought about it a lot. What truly makes those horses so much separate than everything else. And I truly believe it's because it's like great people are very highly accomplished people. They do it for how it makes them feel, not for how it makes you feel. And the unique thing about the Hall of Fame caliber horses that we've been blessed with is the presence that they had, the control of their circumstances, and the state of mind they were in to be at that level and to win at that level when all eyes were on them. So I think that, when people talk about the woulda, coulda, shouldas, there was something lacking in them that truly mattered.
So you mentioned a lot of good 2-year-olds coming into your barn. What is it specifically that you as a trainer look for? I know you have a lot, when a lot of your talent comes in, it's a lot of Curlins and gun runners.
A lot. And I think that it's gym class.
Yeah.
And if they're lined up on the wall, I have a feeling in the game was basketball. I have a
love
feeling
that
you
analogy.
pick Michael Jordan.
Okay.
I mean, they got to look, they got to feel, they got
a presence about them.
I think, you talked about Disarm, you talk about Red Route 1, the Winchell Thoroughbreds program, the success,
immaculate.
It's unbelievable. But those horses are turned out with similar horses their whole lives. They've been in that gym, so to speak, their whole lives. They know who they are. For trainers such as myself to feel or suggest you did anything other than get out of the way is mistaken. They know who they are, and when they from day one, they either are that or they aren't.
Well, the cream definitely rises to the top.
And them knowing who they are and being in a competitive setting their whole lives, I think brings it out in them.
Yeah. So you mentioned you get a lot of windshield time traveling.
Yes, I do.
So you might leave here on a Saturday night after a 12, 15-hour day. And
Julie, the road warrior, she is, will leave tonight after the races and go to Dallas. We're off here tomorrow, training and racing, and we'll go to Dallas, races tomorrow, and then Monday I will fly back to Kentucky, get my truck. And we drove last week to Kentucky, but was lucky enough to catch a ride back from Lexington to watch Booth win the Count Fleet. But it's been a week of I can't find anything because everything's in my truck that's parked at the airport.
Well, that's an occupational hazard, I guess you could
Yeah.
say. So when you do travel, are you the passenger or do you actually drive?
It depends on what I have to do. Julie will not let me look at my phone or watch anything on it if I'm driving.
Well, thank God for Julie.
Not even maybe, so.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
She values her life a
will
little bit.
definitely keep me following the rules.
Now, Steve mentioned his family is very deeply rooted in racing. Obviously, that approached your ways as a trainer. How has that crossed over to being the now parent of 2 riders?
I'm not as good at it as my parents were. I wasn't. I was given an amazing example. My mom trained, my dad rode. I got one older brother, Cash, 3.5 years older than me. When Cash turned 16, Dad let him ride everything, the barn. And Cash went on to win the Eclipse, moved to Europe, I think 5-time Golden Whip rider and stuff. I mean, as far as talent goes, Cash has all the talent. I got all the luck, But, and then I came along ride. I was 16. Dad let me ride everything. Not the same results, but I grew up with that example. It's hard for me not to be extremely emotional when I think about it.
Yeah. So is that coming from what your dad instilled in you and what you're trying to instill in the boys?
When we're doing, you've been in this your whole life, and how important it is to everybody, the people you work for, this, that, and the other. And for my parents to be strong enough to put their kids first is an example.
And did you know that when the boys came to you and said, this is what we want to do, that you were going to follow in your dad's footsteps?
It ain't everything.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's either win or watch.
Yeah.
I good, bad, or indifferent. I'm harder on the kids than I am anybody else. I mean, our expectations, collectively, from the morning, from every gallop to every work to every race. I mean, it's, I walk away knowing I need to back off and lighten up and this, that, and the other. Yet when I'm in the moment, I don't ever seem to do that. But parents like training. It's a learning experience. It is. I mean, my bad excuse for it is you don't know you've overdone it until after
the fact.
Till after you did it. But I am impressed and amazed at the horsemanship that the boys have, and I feel it's so unique, that they had the same similar experiences that I did, learning to ride under my father at the training center. The fact that Dad has it, the access to the horses that we've been blessed with, that have taught us so much. I mean, it's not, and obviously with our accomplishments, the boys could, they could be racing managers or somebody else who's never wrong. But for them to be willing to put themselves in the arena to be critiqued, and critiqued harshly, by me, and they step up to it. I mean, they're obviously we have 3 boys, and Darren is, such an amazing person, but he was too heavy to ride by the time he was 12, He followed my diet, I think, so, but not in the riding, but he works with us and stuff, but they'll make it. I mean, they're tough, and they're great horsemen, and they're going to make it.
So you mentioned, obviously, Darren too big by the time he was 12, but Keith and Eric, what moment was it where and you decided they're just not in this for just
What,
giggles,
it
and
was
this is what they want to do.
It was the unique circumstances of COVID.
Oh, okay.
I mean, when Keith was at the University of Texas. I mean, he's got a master's, from Macomb's University of Texas. And when school went online, he came to the track. And, he'd always galloped and gotten on horses in the summer and, mom and dad's forever. And he just started on a regular basis, started working the horses. I could tell, we went to work in horses. I could tell he was good. He was getting the bug because of his.
Got that itch.
No, he can't. His diet. You could
Oh,
tell.
okay.
I mean,
'Cause
they're both
how
pretty
tall
good-sized kids
is
and
Keith?
stuff,
How tall is Keith?
I think they're both 5'10". I mean, they're
Okay.
in the 5'10" range. But you could. I mean, Keith. Grew up running track, and he was always light. But that. Being light and running track and being a jockey are two completely different diets. And but he was working horses regularly, and then just being around it every day and continuously. During COVID, Lone Star was still running. Dad, why, name me on something. Sure, why not? He did go back, finish his master, but knew he wanted to come back and do it. We talked, once he graduated. I said, just the longer. I said, if you don't want to drastically reduce, you take your time to get your weight right and your fitness right, because there's nothing that's going to pull you away from it. You have the time now, so not to be rushed. And like he does everything, he did it intelligently and came back, and his accomplishments have been unbelievable. He never took out his apprenticeship, the 5-pound weight allowance. I just didn't want. We talked about it. Didn't think the pressure of doing lighter would be healthy, and I was concerned with that. But he got to where he did 118, healthy and steadily, and I think that inspired Eric. And then Eric, when he started, he was a junior in high school when COVID hit, and never. School went on the line, and he was at the barn full time after that. And I think being inspired by watching what Keith did, and then obviously following a lot of his guidance as far as weight and diet and everything, got him. And when Eric started, he did start with his apprentice, and for him to win the Eclipse.
I was just going to say, it worked out very well for him.
Unbelievably well. And, he won the Eclipse 45 years after my brother did.
Wow.
I mean, what a moment that was for the whole family.
I'm sure, and I know your parents are just the symbol of proud parents. I mean, they beam, and it's beautiful to see.
It was such an amazing feeling for me and Julie to be there at the Eclipse Awards, but for me to think, when Eric got up to get the award, that all of the mom and dad, know the level of racing they started out, and no battle was too small, and fight for every inch and do all they could, and for it to come full circle, with Eric walking up there, and it felt like he was accepting the award for all of us.
Oh, I'm sure it did. Definitely a family moment. Do you ever find yourself giving them more advice as a trainer or as a dad?
I think all the.
Or is it 50-50?
All the important parenting is left to Julie.
Julie?
No, I'm the trainer. She's the parent, I'm the trainer.
Have they surprised you in any way during their own journey? Like how good they've gotten so quickly, and the fact they're
putting up with me. No, no doubt about it. I mean, you to do this and to do
it's
this
hard.
well. I mean,
And to do it for you.
Yeah, it's. We got a motto: either everything matters or nothing matters.
Yeah.
There's nothing easy about being around me when it comes to racing and horses. And I mean, at what point is somebody allowed not to do their best?
Yeah.
I'm not that guy, and for them to know that about me and be in the middle of it all this time and still, it's like I said, it's a work in progress.
I love watching the races and just during the course of a running of a race, look and oftentimes you say, who's that on that horse? Because they look so good. They're down, and like you mentioned, they're 5'10". They can fold up like accordions and get down and really race ride with some of the best, because this is a tough colony to compete in.
Well, I think what I was so surprised at when they started riding is what an unbelievable understanding they have of horse racing. And it's not always about how hard you can do anything. It's about response and the relationship with them. I mean, you have horses of the value that we do. Take Disarm, perfect example of it. You know, he ran his first race last year on the Preakness on the same day as the Preakness at Churchill. Everybody was out of town. Keith has worked him probably no less than 50 to 75 times in his life. He was getting on him when he broke his maiden as a 2-year-old at Saratoga before Keith was even riding. And then he won his first race last year. And then I moved away from him to Hall of Famers, and you know, he didn't. And then the next time Keith rode him, was the next time he won, which was here. You know, so that level of understanding and horsemanship that has come across with results is obvious. I think that, you know, being a jockey or a trainer, like I said, you are what your record says you are. You know, it's not opinion. Opinion doesn't win a race. You know, it may make you bet, but it's simply an opinion. You know, the results are what matter.
Obviously the eclipse was a very, very big deal, but what has been one of your proudest moments of seeing them in their careers?
I think that, you know,
on the daily, probably.
It's an accumulated thing, but for both of them to have the year that they did last year was significant, and I'm impressed by it when you look back. But when you look at this meet, and you know, Eric won the Commodore on Booth one Saturday, and the next Saturday Keith won the Essex on Red Route, and Red Route had been in a little drought. You know, he had run 2 or 3 races without the results that we had expected, and then, you know, he wins the Essex for Keith, and then obviously last Saturday Booth, you know, wins the Count Fleet, you know, a race, you know, he wins the Whitmore, wins the Count Fleet and stuff. Those horses, best races are for those kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you are what your record says you are. You know, you can get patted on the back, get your nose wiped all you want, but they're going to write it down. They're going to write the results down here. I'm a big numbers guy. Can you get the best out of this horse? And, well, they wrote it down. Obviously, you can.
I'm always curious, how do you decide who each boy rides? Like Keith will ride certain horses and Eric will ride certain horses.
Kind of circumstances.
Okay.
That you kind of get a feel for it in the morning. You know how they respond
What the horse
to them,
needs.
what you think, what they're wanting to do, this, that, and the other. I think that who was available on a certain day going in started it. And then I've never, as history shows, I mean, I like to continuously ride the same people on horses.
Yes.
I have my whole career. I don't change just to change. It's not a move forward. I don't like lateral moves.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to change, move forward. So, I mean, I think that and somebody makes a mistake on one. I've always felt that the guy who made the mistake is the least likely to make it again. You know, why do you want to start over? You know, horses can be tricky or particular or whatever. And then I think that, you know, you do that, and then on the highest level, you have riders that are great at what you think they're great at, and you try to match that the best.
Well, I know that your sons, just seeing them grow up from how they are just proud to be an Asmussen, and that has certainly carried over. When you leg them up, are you still trainer Steve Asmussen, or are you dad most of the time?
I think that I'm definitely a trainer at that point. It is, you know, Keith got hurt really seriously last summer at Churchill, and, you know, just a horrible spill, broke his femur and punctured,
Yeah.
poked a hole in a lung, and that then the parent comes out
Oh,
at
I'm
that
sure.
stage, and it was, he was, in a lot, serious rehab and stuff, and to watch him come back and then start back, it was. When he first started back,
You held your breath a few
there was a little more
times.
apparent than trainer
Yeah.
then, but I grew up in the sport, obviously saw similar things happen to my father, similar things happen to my brother, and part of life.
So another big factor in the boys' success has been one of your assistants, Darren Fleming, has seen them grow and progress, and I'm sure he gives words of advice at times as well.
Yeah, it's a wonderful relationship. You mentioned Darren Fleming, also Scott Blasey, the longtime assistant. That's New Orleans and Churchill, and Darren's always been here. But that's how original I am on names. Keith James is my dad's name, and Jim was my father-in-law, and so Keith is Keith James. Well, Darren, we mention all the time, is Darren Scott, which is Darren Fleming and Scott Blasey.
Who is not involved in horse racing,
Yeah,
but a huge fan.
Darren Scott works for us.
Oh, he does?
He does, absolutely. He's just not riding. But there's plenty for us to do.
He maxed out at 12.
who I assure you, there's still plenty for all of us to do. But yeah, that is, I remember we came from the doctor's appointment, when they identified the sex of our second child, which was obviously Darren Scott. We were at Lone Star at the time and went to the barn, and when told Darren it's a boy, he named it on the spot, and then we obviously were Julie and Darren Scott the whole time she was pregnant, and then when she delivered the baby and stuff, my mom was there, and I go outside to call people. My mom followed me out, and she goes, "Are you really going to name him Darren Scott?" And I go, "Of course not. He's already been named,
They're like your family.
No, of course
They really are.
But I said, "Yeah, of course I am." Mom said, "What if you have a falling out with him?" I said, "Well, Texas will have one more Bubba."
But fortunately, he hasn't been Bubba.
No Bubba.
No Bubbas.
It's still Darren Scott, always will be. But, just like I love to see whenever, the relationship that, Darren and Scott have with all three of the boys, and how they are whenever they are around each other,
Yeah.
or see each other, just the respect and the love that's there. And, I can't, like you mentioned, Darren and Scott are family, and we're like, I'm the perfect storm. The youngest in a racing family, wanted to do this, had great guidance, great horsemanship, and then, been involved with Darren and Scott for 30 years now and stuff.
Yeah.
We've collectively done this. We've learned what we know together through the experiences and the amazing opportunities that we've been given, and then for us to, have that audience and be able to share that with the boys, and them always being a part of it and being that close, have allowed us to be here.
Yeah. So as you can see, the training has resumed. Are there any horses coming out that we might be able to look out for that are possibly breezing?
We have a couple after the break, but no, all of our workers went early.
Okay.
And then with just a few left to gallop.
So you mentioned some up-and-coming 2-year-olds. Are there any that that have already been named that we might be able to look out for in the future?
We have a group. The one that I'm obviously extremely excited because it was one of the barn favorites. We have, of course, a 2-year-old of Winchell's named Spice Runner, but he's Gunite's full brother.
Oh.
All right.
Full?
And we put, yes.
Wow.
And we put everything on him because he's Gunite's full brother, But I say that knowing that, I'm Cash's full brother, and it didn't work out.
Well, I beg to
as far as
disagree.
the performance. But, we have, like I said, we get the greatest chances there is, and obviously we can get results to match them.
Well, you get the ultimate results, and there's a reason why you are in the Hall of Fame, have saddled as many winners as you have. Thank you so much for joining me this morning and taking time, because I know your time is very valuable and precious, so thank you. Give it up for trainer Steve Asmussen.